Imagine you woke up on November 11th, 1917, and you get news that the armistice was signed. What's the first thing you're doing?
Hello, my name is Omar and I'm a student at the Kamcha International School Linko campus. And today I'm going to be reviewing the start of the World War I Armistice 100 years later by Rachel Basinger. The book talks about the events leading up to the armistice, where the armistice happened, what happened during the armistice, and what happened after the armistice was official.
And what I noticed from the author's use of primary sources, of people's testimonies and statements, is that she focuses more on emotions and personal experiences rather than a political view or social view during that time. The book focuses on the importance of the end of World War I and the effect the war had on everyone, showing different people's reactions of everyone a part of it, even if there were citizens, soldiers, or even people who made crucial steps during the war. But as I analyze the book further, I see that it focuses more on an Allied perspective and uses a lot of primary sources from Allied countries. It does use sources from people from the Central Power side, but doesn't go into full detail, especially German reparations, which is a huge topic the author chose not to go into detail about. Rather talking about the reactions and using primary sources from the Allied side, only really giving the Germans a broad view of being relieved than the many different reactions that the Allied perspective had. From reading the book and how she wrote it, I think the author's argument is made clear. She wants to state that the armistice isn't just how it affected the world economically and on territorial disputes, but on how the entirety of the war affected people mentally and gave trauma that caused them to be more scared of the world socially. The author used strong primary sources from people who experienced the real thing. For example, Captain Griffith of the Welsh Fusiliers talked about the cruelty of how the war is impersonal, but so dear to people who were in the middle of it. The author is neutral and doesn't pick any side, and writes in a fair way to both sides, but does use way more sources from the Allied side compared to the Central Power side. Now, even though the author uses a lot of primary sources from the Allied perspective, she also uses factual statements and documents of events that happened. For example, she uses the statement from the US of the League of Nations to be placed for order, and the 14 points to be implemented into political society. The author also uses factual statements from famous people during World War I who played a very critical role. For example, the negotiator for the armistice from the French side was a man named Ferdinand Foch, who stated he wanted to pursue German soldiers with harsh treatment in negotiation and finally into surrender. Those aren't the exact words, but that was his motive. It was his motive because all of the personal hate that has been accumulated throughout the war by everyone. However, there was a few things unclear by the author's argument. As I said, she uses a lot of Allied perspective, but she doesn't mention as much as Central Power problems after the armistice, which gives her argument of how everyone was affected mentally more than socially and economically a downside to her point. The author also does mention the League of Nations, which was presented by the United States, and shows a document which consisted of major countries from the war, mostly being of allies, and several delegations from Japan, but does not go into full detail of why Germany wasn't included, only really stating they weren't allowed and not using any documentations or statements from people who denied German entry to the League of Nations. Now, After the armistice, the author does go into full detail about the reparations the Germans had to face, but not their reactions to the extreme lists of debts they had to repay. The author also does not mention how World War II is connected with World War I, and why some Germans wanted revenge and made a political group to become superior again in Europe. She does mention Hitler, who was a part of World War I, who had been a Lance Corporal, but does not explain World War I had a tremendous factor on embarrassment for Germans, which led Hitler and his political group to be one of the reasons for World War II. From my reading experience, I can say the author did a good job at telling the emotional impact from World War II and the Armistice, which made most people feel fearful of another war and recognize peace more. And I would say she did a great job on telling people's personal experience and trauma from the war, but as I said, failed to show more of a central power reaction. If people wanted to understand how people felt during the war, I would recommend this book. But if they're looking for how it affected the economy and the social life, then I wouldn't recommend it. And the author wrote more about the emotional effect and side